What is going on, everybody? James Hancock here. I'm back to review Killers of the Flower Moon from director Martin Scorsese. I just saw it in IMAX 2D. And I guess I should go spoiler-free initially, but toward the end of the video, I might have a few spoiler comments, but not to worry. I'll give you a fair warning before I divulge any specific details. At any rate, let's not beat around the bush. Let's just dive right into things. I think there is a 2.5-hour masterpiece tucked away inside this 3.5-hour kind of character-driven, sprawling epic. And who am I to tell Martin Scorsese how to cut his movies? I mean, at this point, he's been making movies. If you include his short films as a student, he's been making movies for 60 years, and many of those movies are some of my all-time favorite movies. I mean, some of the best movies that I've ever seen. He is an international filmmaking treasure. So he has earned the right to direct movies however the hell he pleases. However, for people that are buying a ticket and sitting in the theater, I think some people will be shifting in their seat or, tempted to check what time it is before the movie completely draws to a close, because this is not a movie like Wolf of Wall Street, where for 3 hours you're watching like sex and cocaine and all the other crazy shit that was contained within that film, which actually ended up grossing $400 million worldwide, which was a big hit by Martin Scorsese standards. Killers of the Flower Moon is not a crowd pleaser like that, but I think there will be some people that are completely, totally just mesmerized by the experience, because this is like, take like the grandest, most epic Western imaginable and then combine it with like a, not a Prohibition era, but just like a period, like 1920s era crime film, and then let them kind of, let them make like a movie baby together. And that's what it looks and feels like. And I love gangster movies and I love Westerns, and it's an absolutely just staggering achievement. But I think it's going to end up being one of those movies where people talk about how impressed they are by the achievement, how impressed they are by the production design, the photography, the costume, the performances. I don't think it's going to be anybody's favorite Martin Scorsese movie. Like his best movies like Goodfellas or Taxi Driver or Mean Streets or Raging Bull, like these are movies that I've seen 30, 40, 50, 60 times. I have no idea how many times I've seen all of his best movies, but those are movies that you can watch in a loop over and over and over again, and it's just like sheer bliss each and every single time you revisit those classic movies by him. And I do think I will be revisiting Killers of the Flower Moon at some point, just not in the next couple days. I think I need to take a break from Killers of the Flower Moon, but I probably should read the book, and I should admit, I've not read the book, so I can't do a proper compare and contrast between the source material and the actual final product. But here's all the information from Wikipedia, just so you have kind of like the bare bones of what the movie's all about. Killers of the Flower Moon is a 2023 American epic Western crime drama film directed and produced by Martin Scorsese, who co-wrote the screenplay with Eric Roth based on the 2017 book of the same name by David Gran. Its plot centers on a series of Oklahoma murders in the Osage Nation during the 1920s, committed after oil was discovered on tribal land. Leonardo DiCaprio, Robert De Niro, and Lily Gladstone lead an ensemble cast that includes Jesse Plemons, Tantu Cardinal, John Lithgow, and Brendan Fraser. It is the 6th feature film collaboration between Scorsese and DiCaprio, and the 10th between Scorsese and De Niro. For people who are keeping track of these things, De Niro and Scorsese have now been making movies together for 50 years. Like Mean Streets came out a long time ago. And according to this entry, the film had a budget of roughly $200 million, and it will be released on Apple TV Plus at an unspecified date. Yeah, I'll be very curious to see how well this does theatrically, because watching it in IMAX, I mean, it's a fucking jaw-dropping experience in so many ways. And the market for IMAX epics is so unpredictable. Like if someone were to ask me, or had asked me in advance of the release of Oppenheimer, how well would that movie play internationally? Never in a million years would I have guessed that it would gross over $900 million worldwide. So I feel like the audience is there for big, sprawling, historical, epic dramas on the big screen. But this one's very tough to predict because it doesn't have like an airtight screenplay. It's very, I guess, decompressed in its overall approach to the storytelling. And I would even go so far as to say that like the screws needed to be tightened just across the entire film, from start to finish. Tighten up here, get it down to somewhere between 2.5 and 3 hours, 3 hours long. But there are plenty of successful films out there that are well over 3 hours long, like Seven Samurai, one of the best movies ever made, or movies like Gone with the Wind. I think Gone with the Wind is like 4 or 4.5. Like there is a historical precedent for really long movies being successful. Or Avengers Endgame. Obviously, this movie has nothing in common with Avengers Endgame, but people are happy to sit in the theater for a long time if you give them a compelling reason to do so. But I feel like when it comes to the screenplay as well as the overall editing, once again, the screws could have been tightened to deliver deliver a more riveting movie experience. But once again, Scorsese probably knows more about filmmaking than any other human being alive. So this is precisely the movie that he wanted to present to us, and who am I to tell him that he's wrong? So let's start with the good. What did I like? The Osage way of life and the history, that stuff is absolutely fascinating, because you have this absolutely like barren landscape in Oklahoma, which, you know, some people are raising cattle and that sort of thing, but they strike oil. And for a brief time, the Osage tribe, they enjoyed a higher standard of living per capita than any other race of people or community of people anywhere else in the world. I mean, so they go from like living in the fields to driving around in fancy cars and partying every night and, like, you know, wearing jewels. I mean, it's just absolutely bananas seeing just the level of like vice and avarice that some people are embracing. And of course, anytime you have an environment where there's a lot of money flowing around, you're going to attract the vultures, the jackals, the predators. Slowly but surely, a criminal element emerges in this environment where, through whatever means are at their disposal, they slowly but surely start preying upon this community. And some people are just thugs and they'll just rob you at gunpoint. Then there are other people that have these elaborate schemes that might take years to hatch, and that is where we find the characters of Leonardo DiCaprio and Robert De Niro. As you can see in the trailer, Robert De Niro basically wants to encourage as many men in his family to marry into the Osage, and then over time, once it looks like the oil rights will either go to the husband or to the children, basically keeping that money in the family, Robert De Niro has these thugs and these henchmen and these like essentially highway robbers slowly but surely start picking people off through violence or through drugs or through alcohol or through explosions, whatever the case might be. I mean, this movie spares no detail when it comes to the violence. I would argue that the violence in this movie, when people are really cutting loose, it's as shocking and grotesque as anything as you might see in like Casino or Goodfellas. But getting back to the Osage, through the character of Lily Gladstone, we get to know this culture and these people, and it's absolutely fascinating to see in the rituals and the way the women talk to each other about the men in their lives and that sort of thing. And I just thought that was an absolute home run. And I don't know how large the Osage population is to this day or how many people claim Osage ancestry, but I imagine they're going to be absolutely riveted by all those details, you know, thrown up there on the big screen. And another aspect that I feel like you cannot properly praise enough would be the photography by Rodrigo Prieto. I think it's safe to say that this is one of the most stunning and beautiful films of Martin Scorsese's career, and he's been delivering stunning visuals his entire career. I mean, even going back to like Mean Streets, seeing what he was able to do with considerably fewer resources, I don't know if any filmmaker has ever moved the camera better than Scorsese, because he understands you don't just move the camera for the sake of moving it, because I feel like some filmmakers sometimes feel like, oh, because I can do something, I should do something just to show off like their technical virtuosity. You should move the camera with a sense of purpose. You should use it to maximize the emotional impact of the story. And I feel like, yeah, Scorsese understands while a great screenplay is incredibly important, but beautiful visual storytelling is the essence of filmmaking, and I feel like Rodrigo Prieto is the perfect dance partner, along with production designer Jack Fisk or even costume designer Jacqueline West. I feel like on a technical level, Scorsese surrounded himself with a lot of incredible people. And Jack Fisk, I mean, he is old as hell at this point. I mean, he's been doing work since the 70s. There are a lot of people in this movie that are getting up there in age, or Thelma Schoonmaker, the editor. But no matter what rural film you might regard as having the most stunning visuals of any film you've ever seen, whether that's Terrence Malick's Days of Heaven or the exterior shots from like John Ford's The Searchers, I feel like Killers of the Flower Moon is going to leave people absolutely spellbound as they just see these sweeping vistas, or even some really cool, interesting camera movements during some of the dialogue scenes. I just feel like, Scorsese, he has not lost a step when it comes to delivering the most visual stimulation humanly possible, all in service of the emotions of the story. But for those people out there who kind of fall under the spell of Killers of the Flower Moon, I think a lot of that credit is going to go to the relationship between Leonardo DiCaprio and Lily Gladstone, which is pretty astonishing to behold. Like Lily Gladstone, she's got a very reserved way of speaking, because part of the Osage culture is not to just run your mouth for no reason. They've got some expression like, think of those people as like blackbirds or something like that. But Leonardo DiCaprio's character loves to run his mouth all the time, but she just kind of watches and observes and takes it in. But even though she's on, like, basically she's being manipulated as part of this elaborate conspiracy to try to rob her family of her oil rights, But what makes it interesting is how Leonardo DiCaprio is playing this incredibly complex, multifaceted stooge. Like on one hand, he's being manipulated and kind of pushed around by his uncle, played by Robert De Niro, and he has so many ethical and moral shortcomings. I mean, he's just an incredibly compromised character in so many ways, who is more than capable of some truly horrendous acts. However, when you see him interacting with her kids, when you see him just cuddling in bed with Lily Gladstone, like the love feels real. And it's hard for a giant, iconic actor like Leonardo DiCaprio to play somebody who's kind of small and kind of simple. Like so much about his personality, you just feel like, oh, like he's just not that smart or not that intelligent. So it's very easy for people to kind of push him one way or another, where he kind of wants to keep everybody happy. However, you can't excuse the fact that some truly depraved, violent, horrible things take place, where he is absolutely instrumental in making those things happen. And I think it takes an actor of Leonardo DiCaprio's talent to make you still be kind of sort of rooting for him, even as you're horrified by some of the things that he does. Once again, he's a multifaceted, multidimensional character. My only criticism would be that Leonardo DiCaprio's accent kind of comes and goes at times, and you could offer the excuse, well, his character drinks a lot, so when he's drinking, the accent gets a little thicker. But what I notice is how when he's acting opposite an actor like Jesse Plemons, and Jesse Plemons is from Dallas, it's got a very authentic, Southern accent. When Leo is sharing the screen with Jesse, Leo's accent he cranks it up a bit. You're like, whoa! Suddenly you're getting you're from Hicksville. Like, where did that accent come from? So maybe you could criticize him for kind of hamming it up at times, or just being inconsistent with his Southern drawl. However, the chemistry between him and Lily Gladstone is just absolutely first rate. And I think a lot of people probably are totally unfamiliar with Lily Gladstone, because a lot of the films that she's appeared in are much smaller, kind of like, micro-budget films. I would not be surprised whatsoever if she gets nominated for a whole shitload of awards. I still feel like Emma Stone is going to be kind of the actress to beat this year at the Oscars, but Lily Gladstone, there are going to be a lot of people rooting for her. But another actor I liked in this was Scott Shepherd, who I think I first saw in the show The Young Pope. He was incredible in that, but he's incredible in this, but he's just like the angel of death, just like one of those true enforcers who is... He's less of a stooge and more of just a collaborator with the character played by Robert De Niro. And Robert De Niro, he's fine in this, but I think of all the accents in this movie, his is the weakest, because usually in his scenes where he's just, doing his thing, he's surrounded by a lot of people who have incredibly authentic sounding accents. Like the actor Gene Jones, who's old as hell at this point, but a lot of people will recognize him from the gas station sequence from No Country for Old Men, where he and Javier Bardem have that classic exchange about the quarter. Like his accent is incredibly authentic. And if you have somebody with like a legit Southern drawl just doing their thing, all while Robert De Niro is kind of, I wouldn't say phoning it in, but it feels inauthentic. It feels like, I don't know where that accent's from. Like you can tell, like with Jesse Plemons, oh, you sound like you're from Texas. Robert De Niro just sounds like he's doing a kind of a generic Southern accent. Maybe it won't be as distracting for some people as it was for me, but I felt like as talented as Robert De Niro is, and we've all seen him do brilliant work in things like Raging Bull and Taxi Driver, etc., or Goodfellas, those accents sounded authentic. Here, less so, but if you disagree with me, that's fine. But another thing I want to mention in terms of the qualities that I really admired, very rarely with a long 3.5-hour movie do you see the last hour really kind of getting into a big emotional crescendo, but I really felt like the best this movie had to offer was in that final hour, and that's hard to do. Usually by that point, even if you're watching The Godfather Part 2, like you're kind of wearing out your welcome, but this movie manages to put its best foot forward toward the end. Maybe the last 2 minutes, I was like, whoa, that kind of came out of nowhere. Like, why'd y'all go with that ending? Or the movie delivers a lot of exposition at the end, and I think they were trying to find what's an off the beaten pathway where we can deliver all the final facts and all the information that the audience needs. It didn't entirely work for me. However, the last hour leading up to that was pretty sensational, very fast-paced. And as far as the things that I liked less are concerned, I should acknowledge in advance that I went into this movie a little hungover. I tied one on last night. Probably had one glass of scotch too many with my friends. But yeah, don't go see this sick. Don't go see it tired. Don't go see it hungover. And definitely don't go see it drunk. There was this mongrel down the road from me. I'm pretty sure that he was actually hammered during the movie. But about 30 minutes into the flick, I had to turn to him and issue some harsh words his way, because every time the Osage were chanting in the movie, this guy would start mocking them and kind of like imitating them. It was like, I couldn't believe that somebody who would pay money to go see a 3.5-hour epic about the Osage would have the goddamn gall to be mocking the characters on the screen. But I think he might have been dragged to the movie by the girl he was with, because the girl turned to me, she apologized, the guy did not. But let's set aside my hatred and loathing for that person who was never taught how to behave in public. Yeah, really, my only real criticism of the movie is the length. 3.5 hours is real tough unless you were just, like I said, like Wolf of Wall Street, giving like drugs, alcohol, sex, nudity. Like, you got to throw a lot of red meat to the audience for them to sit there for 3.5 hours. As far as like bad performances go, Brendan Fraser, he really jumped out at me. Like in the last hour of the movie, a lot of new characters are introduced, like John Lithgow, and John Lithgow was incredible in it. Brendan Fraser was so awful that I thought he was almost being bad on purpose. I mean, it was like melodramatic, like unintentionally comic. He was just so over the top and so annoying, and anyway, it'll have to be seen by you to be believed. Another criticism has nothing to do with the movie itself, but for whatever reason, they showed about 30 minutes of trailers before the movie. It's like, I get it. It's like a big, giant, prestigious film. You should never show 30 minutes of trailers before a long movie. Like, show 3 trailers, show 4. I don't think any trailers should be shown before movies, but I just feel like in the 21st century, most people watch trailers online when they drop. Whereas, you know, as a kid in the 80s and 90s, when I went to the movies, seeing the trailers was like the best part, because usually I hadn't seen any of the trailers, and it was a really exciting part of the experience. I don't really know what role trailers have in the theatrical experience now, especially with a movie where you're going to be in the theater all goddamn day, but that is obviously not a criticism of the movie. But I guess in general, there were just one too many scenes where it just felt like the scenes had almost kind of like a loose improvisational flavor. And Scorsese is more than happy to experiment with improvisations with his actors, but I just felt like a tighter construction would have served the story better, would have given it more emotional intensity. But it's hard to pin my finger on any one specific flaw of the film, apart from just saying that it's not as entertaining as something like Goodfellas or Casino or The Wolf of Wall Street. And obviously that's not what the movie's going for. It's depicting this horrible tragedy where a lot of people were murdered and disenfranchised of their land and their property rights and their money. And so it's just an absolutely gruesome story in so many ways. So I feel like trying to make it more entertaining almost would have felt like it was in bad taste. But don't be surprised if you find yourself squirming in your seat, because you will not be alone on that front. But I think overall, yeah, it's an absolutely majestic, awe-inspiring, impressive achievement, but it's just not one of those movies that's going to force a lot of diehard, longtime Scorsese fans to rearrange their top 10 lists. And speaking of which, I'll include a link to my top 10 list in the video description below, because my favorite movies by Scorsese all come between the early 70s and the mid-90s. Like, if he had retired in the mid-90s, I feel like he still would have remained one of the greatest directors ever to emerge from the American filmmaking scene. And I've thoroughly enjoyed watching all of his movies since then. But at this point in his career, Martin Scorsese, he's going to be 81 in a few short weeks. I feel like he has earned the right to make movies however the hell he wants to. And if Apple's willing to throw down $200 million to let him do so, like, more power to them. Like, Apple generates, I think, something like $90 billion in revenue per quarter from selling hardware. Like, they could make a movie of like the size and scale of Killers of the Flower Moon every other month and release it. And even if those movies made $0, I don't really know if they would even notice. Like, at this point, Apple films are just icing on the cake. It's like additional stuff that they can offer when you buy one of their devices. So look, if you sign up for Apple TV Plus, these are some of the movies and shows that you can enjoy. And so I'm thrilled that we had this player that is willing to throw down these giant sums of money to make sweeping historical epics. And in a few short weeks, we've got Napoleon from Ridley Scott. And it's like, God damn, all right. Like, I would love to hear from Apple how they measure and gauge the success of these productions. Like, what are their goals and aspirations? Because if Warner Brothers were making movies like this, like, they need to sell tickets. And sometimes I feel like the economic constraints, or like the commercial reality of putting a movie in the theater where you have to sell tickets, it adds an additional level of discipline and rigor to the film, where it's like, you better put your best foot forward, because if you don't deliver, people are going to go watch YouTube, or they'll go watch sports. Like, there's so many rivals for our attention. Like, the brutal commercial reality of selling tickets will force filmmakers to tighten up their game and deliver the best film possible. But if Apple says, look, we don't care if we sell a single ticket, well, then that's going to change the way the filmmaker approaches the movie, or the way they cut the movie and the way they released the movie. But I'm just thrilled that Apple finally gave Martin Scorsese the chance to do what will likely be the closest thing he ever makes to a full-blown Western. And if you watch the documentary A Personal Journey with Martin Scorsese through American filmmaking, it's got an entire section devoted just to Westerns. He's a Western freak. He loves them. I mean, when you watch Mean Streets, you see scenes from The Searchers, and when you watch like Who's That Knocking on My Door, you hear Harvey Keitel once again talking about The Searchers. Martin Scorsese really likes The Searchers, and I really like The Searchers too. But I feel like his whole career has been kind of leading up to this moment where he finally gets a chance to make something that resembles a giant sprawling Western. So high five to Apple for giving him a shot. And at a time where so many of the traditional studios like Universal or Paramount or Disney or Warner Brothers all struggling to kind of find their way. I mean, obviously they've been beset by strikes, but also if you just look at their output creatively, I mean, Disney had Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny, and Warner Brothers had Flash. Like, there've been all these like costly, like incredibly costly, just complete and total creative misfires. I feel like this last year I've had an alarming number of flops. Like for every movie like Oppenheimer or Barbie that really like connects with an audience and does really well, I feel like you can point to 2 or 3 other films that just completely, totally fell on their face. And I feel like it kind of keeps the studios honest, having Apple emerging as this new player. And I should admit that it's through Paramount that Apple is distributing this movie. But they don't work exclusively through Paramount because Sony is going to be distributing Napoleon. But before I wrap up this video, I did want to offer one bit of praise that is spoiler related. So if you don't want any spoilers whatsoever, bail out now. But there's this one scene toward the end there's a courtroom drama scene where I was like, oh my God, like Scorsese is basically remaking some of the best scenes from Goodfellas. And if you remember from Goodfellas toward the end of the movie, the character played by Ray Liotta, he's been asked to point to some of the people that he worked with, including characters like Paulie and Jimmy, etc. But everything about the way the scene is staged, the way the camera moves, the way the shot composition, etc. It's like people who enjoy doing side-by-side comparisons on social media between classic movies and contemporary movies, they're going to have a field day with that scene where I feel like Scorsese almost deliberately was trying to recreate that scene. And also, it's Robert De Niro sitting in the exact same position where he was sitting in Goodfellas. He's over there on the left, scowling at the stooge who's kind of selling him out. And at any rate, I just thought that was really interesting, seeing a master revisiting a scene 30 years later and showing that he can still do a scene just like that when he feels like it. But at this point, I feel like I've said all I have to say. Definitely hunt down my top 10 Martin Scorsese video. It will remain relevant because as much as I enjoyed this movie, it's not going to rearrange my top 10. But if you enjoyed what I had to say about this movie, please consider liking the video, subscribing to the channel, hitting that notification bell. But I hope everybody has a great weekend at the movies, but more importantly, as always, onwards and upwards.